revealed. But one thing he said in that interview stuck in my memory and my imagination. He said, "Some things are worth dying for. The country is one of them." There are some things worth dying for. We talked about that last week to a degree when we thought about Memorial Day and people who have given their lives for our freedom. Some things worth dying for. I remember as a teenager reading an interview with Sam Peckinpah, the great film director. And he quoted a friend of his, and his friend was asked, "Would you die for what you believe in?" And the friend's answer was, "No, I might be wrong," which is kind of cynical. But if you really, really believe something that's important to you, when you really cherish something, it is worth dying for. And Peter is talking about that in our lesson for today. He's talking to Christians who are facing persecution for their faith. He's trying to encourage them. Don't give up on Jesus because of this persecution. And Peter reminds his hearers that Jesus suffered and died for us, so it's appropriate for us to be willing to suffer and die for him. And Peter actually lived that out. Peter himself died for the faith, crucified upside down according to Christian tradition, because he did not feel worthy to die the same way that Jesus did. Now, Peter is writing to Christians who are persecuted by a hostile government. Now, that seems very far removed from what we have in America today. Our Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, and we can gather here in this holy place without fear of government agents bursting in and arresting us. And that's not true in a lot of countries. And we can preach whatever God calls upon us to preach, and that's not true in a lot of countries. So in America today, the possibility of suffering and dying for Jesus is pretty remote. Now, some people, though, do feel there is a war on Christianity in this country. And certainly our faith is frequently attacked in popular culture. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. A few years ago, the makers of a grown-up cartoon decided to test the censors at their network. They did an episode of their cartoon that depicted both Jesus and Muhammad. Now, Jesus was shown doing something vile and disgusting. Muhammad was shown delivering a pizza. And they made this episode wondering, what will the network censors do with this episode? Will they take out the scene of Jesus doing something disgusting and vile and leave Muhammad delivering the pizza? Or would they take out Muhammad delivering the pizza and leave Jesus doing something disgusting and vile? Or would they take out both, or would they take out neither? As you might guess, what they did was they took out the scene with Muhammad delivering the pizza, and they left the scene of Jesus doing something disgusting and vile. Now, the makers of this cartoon are total atheists. They have no dog in this fight. They don't believe in Jesus. They don't believe in Muhammad. But they were trying to show the hypocrisy of their television network. They were trying to show that some religions get protected, and other religions it's okay to hammer. And the religion that always gets hammered is Christianity. There is a franchise of forensic investigation shows. One series in that franchise, I believe, is set in Washington, the other in Los Angeles. And a while back, both of these series ran Christmas episodes. Ah, yes, Christmas episodes. When I was a kid, a Christmas episode was supposed to make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Well, things have changed, because one of these Christmas episodes was about an honor killing committed by a Christian. It's about a military chaplain who had two sons, and one of the brothers converted to Islam, and the other brother killed him. A Christian honor killing. And the other Christmas episode was about a suicide bomber. A suicide bomber who was a Christian. And that's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown. Christians who kill. Recently, a new Jack Ryan movie came out. Jack Ryan, the great Tom Clancy character, CIA officer. And in this new Jack Ryan movie, there is a cell of terrorists in Dearborn, Michigan. And naturally, these terrorists in Dearborn, Michigan were Russian Orthodox Christians. They actually were operating out of a Russian Orthodox church, and their priest was giving them orders for their terrorist operations. The late Tom Clancy, by the way, had absolutely nothing to do with this movie. Now, honor killings, suicide bombings, terrorist cells, these are not things that you ordinarily associate with Christianity, but in the minds of some in the entertainment industry, we Christians are potential terrorists. We are potential murderers. We are potential bombers. In the minds of some, it's the Christians you gotta look out for. But just because we tend to get hammered in the popular culture, that does not mean we are being persecuted. Actually, things got even a little better for Christians in this country. A couple of weeks ago, with a recent Supreme Court decision, the court says that it's okay to have a prayer at the beginning of a town meeting. And that is really a great victory that was handed to believers. So just because TV shows like to paint us as potential terrorists, that does not mean that we live under persecution in this country. And lots of Christians today do live under persecution. A few months ago, a young Coptic woman was attacked and killed by a mob in Egypt. Why? Because she was wearing a cross around her neck. Just a few weeks ago, and this did get a lot of publicity, a bunch of girls were kidnapped in Nigeria from a school. Why? Because they were Christians. A few years ago, a bomb was set off at a house of worship in Iraq, and 50 people were killed. Why? Because they were Christians. There are Christians all around the world who are being seriously persecuted. So even if the TV and movie folks don't always like us very much, we still have it really good in this country when you compare to other lands. Of course, that could always change. There is a famous quote from Francis Cardinal George, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Chicago, who said this just a couple of years ago. He said this, "I expect to die in bed. My successor will die in prison, and his successor will die a martyr in the public square." And what Cardinal George is saying is just because we Christians have it good now in America, doesn't mean that's going to last forever. And that's why we want to embrace that concept. Some things are worth dying for. Jesus above all, Jesus is worth dying for. This weekend is confirmation. And in the old confirmation service, the kids had to make a promise that went something like this. I will suffer all, even death, rather than fall away from this faith and this church. That's a pretty heavy promise for a 14-year-old to make. The modern service softens it a little bit. But that still is something that we need to carry in our hearts. That's still something we need to carry in our hearts, that I have something in my life so precious that it's worth dying for. The love of God in Jesus Christ, His sacrifice for me, the forgiveness of my sins, the joy of knowing that He loves me personally, that He knows me by name, these are things that we cherish. These are things that give our lives meaning. And ultimately, these are things that are worth suffering and dying for. But again, that's pretty remote in modern America. But I was watching an ad for the movie Lone Survivor, though, and there's a line there where a Navy SEAL says, "You can die for your country, I want to live for my country." And there's some wisdom. We're probably not going to die for Jesus, but we can live for Jesus. We can orient our lives around Him and live in a way that upholds His name and gives Him glory. And that involves sacrifice too. It's not a bloody sacrifice like St. Stephen being stoned to death, or being crucified upside down like St. Peter, but there may be some sacrifice involved when we live for Jesus. I learned something interesting about one of our confirmands this week. I learned that she gave up membership in a traveling sports team so that she would not have to miss the confirmation lessons. I don't know if I would call that suffering, but I would call it sacrifice, because being on this traveling team would have been very important for her. But she gave it up. And as I was talking to her, I reminded her of some famous sports figures, none of whom she had heard of, I'm sure. But I reminded her of some famous sports figures who did similar things. I reminded her of Eric Liddell, the Flying Scotsman, the great Christian track star who would not run in a Sunday race in the 1924 Olympics. Or Sandy Koufax, a man of a different faith, but one who would not pitch a World Series game on Yom Kippur. That's not dying for your faith, but it is sacrificing for your faith. It's showing that your faith is the most important thing in your life. It's living for your faith. Some things are worth dying for, and certainly our faith is worth dying for. But that's probably not going to happen in modern America, where generally the worst thing we get are hostile TV shows. It's probably not going to happen in modern America. So we want to remember that a faith worth dying for is also a faith worth living for. Glory to Jesus, now and always. Amen. And may the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in Christ to life everlasting. Amen.